My biggest fear at the time was I was getting ready to retire from professional women's hockey and I was so disoriented. Like my entire identity, I feel like up to the 26 years at this point of my life had really been oriented in and around being an athlete and 26 years old. And I came out of an Ivy League school, keep in mind. And I just remember being kind of pissed off, right? Like that I didn't come out of those gates having all of that orientation sort of clearly laid out for me. I remember my biggest gap was that I felt so lost. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project, changing the way the game is played. This podcast helps purpose-driven leaders unlock their highest potential so that they can play their biggest impact game. Welcome back to the Leadership Launchpad Project, changing the way this game is being played. We are so fired up and excited that you are back here with us today. I've got my co-pilots, Shelly and Leanne, to my left and my right, and we are flying so low on this pod today, right, ladies?
We are.
Looking forward to this.
As we talked about at the start of this year, we said that we were going to shake up sort of the structure and format of this show a little bit. And so whilst we're continuing to bring in some of the world's leading experts and guests in and around the concepts of Leadership 2.0, we also decided that we want to be those guests every now and then for all of you, because what we have become super conscious and aware of is the fact that we've never really in this podcast format or the last had the opportunity to get behind these gates right here, right? And so, yeah, we've had some feedback. Obviously, we're in the year of co-creation on this show. That is our anchor word. And so, yeah, we've been hearing from all of you in terms of your curiosity to hear from us in terms of some of the things that we interview our guests on. So excited for this solo pod today. How you girls doing, feeling about this show?
Oh, very, very excited. I think it's going to be fun to delve into each other's stories. Shelly, I actually haven't heard yours yet. So yeah, very curious about that.
Shelly, how about you? You ready for the hot seat?
I am really ready for the hot seat. You know my story, Susan. I'm super excited to share it as well.
I know. I can't wait for you all to share your story because I happen to be the lucky one as the coach of both of you all, who is privy to just how incredibly inspiring a backstory you both have. And so the place that we wanted to start today, because obviously this is a weekly format, we're not going to have a chance to get into our entire backstory, right, and penetrate everything in terms of what lies behind these gates. But the starting point we thought could be, the starting point to our hero's journey, right? So sort of dipping back into the time machine and shuttling all the way back to really start to remember just how we even got on this track to begin with, right? In regards to where we discovered this opportunity for growth in and around coaching and how game changer a vehicle that can be for realizing our highest potential. And I know I get asked that question all the time in terms of, do I have a coach? Do I work with a coach? How long have I worked with a coach? It's sometimes the hot seat that candidates will put me on when they're interviewing me as a potential coach of them. But yeah, would you ladies remember when that first occurred for both of you in your lanes?
Of course, 100%. But I want to hear Leanne first.
Oh,
okay,
Leanne.
it's funny. I was going to say, well, speaking of co-creation, I think obviously Susan has been a very co-creator, Shelly, with both you and I in our journeys. And I almost wondered if Susan should go first and just set up how and why she became such a game-changing coach.
You know what I'm dying to know from Susan too is what was her biggest gap?
Oh, wow. Okay, well, I accept the challenge. I love a hot seat. So yeah, I feel like for me, the most obvious starting point in my hero's journey was the portal of sports, right? Like, I feel like it gave me such a real-time experience and respect for just how game changer it can be to have professionals who live outside of your experience, who are all around you in terms of the 360-degree points of observation on your performance. Yeah, I got that in the context of hockey, right? And I was able to very quickly and easily see that there's just no way I would have been able to realize the heights that I did in my playing career unless I had people outside of me pointing out my gaps, right? Helping me illuminate my blind spots, and then ultimately helping me architect the strategies that showed me how to close them. So that one I feel like is the boring, obvious one. I feel like the less obvious one is one that maybe I've never even spoken about in public forum before, which is when I first came out of university. I was playing professional hockey and I hired my first professional coach. And that was in and around the time when I was first like trying to figure out, which way I was going to go with my education. I studied all of this in terms of performance psychology at Princeton. But I wasn't really necessarily certain when I came out those gates exactly how I wanted to show up on this mission in terms of helping people grow and realize max potential. And so when I first hired a coach, yeah, it was in and around some of that professional development, like in terms of the type of coach I wanted to be and the type of business that I wanted to create. And that's where I first was able to kind of go through some of the exercises that we run our people through, right? This is where I remember saying to this first coach of mine, my biggest fear at the time was I was getting ready to retire from professional women's hockey and I was so disoriented. Like my entire identity, I feel like up to the 26 years at this point of my life had really been oriented in and around being an athlete. And so I said to him, I said, I need your help finding a career path that is going to be as fulfilling for me as hockey has been, I remember saying to this coach, like, I go down to the rink early, I watch game tape, I stay late, I ride the bike, I take cold tubs, and none of it feels like work. All of it feels so effortless for me in terms of how much I pour into my development for the purposes of my sport. Yeah, and I'm just really afraid of what it's going to feel like to have a job, because I was very, very, very much aware of the fact that because it felt so effortless, that was a massively important aspect of how I was able to realize max potential, right? Is because I knew that, yeah, my sport got me into my flow. And so I remember him running me through some of those sweet spot exercises that we do with our coaching clients. I remember him helping me see that a lot of the same skills and talents and strengths and attributes that I got to apply in the condition of sports, naturally, I could parlay into being a performance coach for others, right? I was able to see just how many of my values that were embedded in hockey were actually congruent in terms of this coaching space and also specifically in and around high performance. And so, yeah, I was 26 years old and I came out of an Ivy League school, keep in mind. And I just remember being kind of pissed off, right? Like that I didn't come out of those gates having all of that orientation sort of clearly laid out for me. I remember my biggest gap was that I felt so lost. And I know that that's terminology that we calibrate a lot when our clients walk through the door, right? Because at the time, what that language or those linguistics was referring to or illuminating in terms of my blind spots were, yeah, just like not really necessarily being fully at the helm in my self-leadership yet, right? Like, I just wasn't fully the expert in myself yet. And I wasn't therefore able to qualify, check that and validate such massive decisions in and around, what I'm going to do with the rest of my life professionally. I wasn't able to do that with any confidence or certainty because I just wasn't yet, yeah, really just knowing that this was who I was. And therefore, this naturally was what I was meant to do and be in my professional life. So that's what I remember. It was a really long time ago, but yeah, I remember taking that inspiration, obviously, because it's a large part of what informed my creation of our process. You know, it's a lot of the same work that we do with high achievers when they come through our door today. So how about you ladies? Any questions about anything that I
Yeah,
just
well,
riffed on?
absolutely. I'm listening to you, and I love this thread of, when you were a young athlete, you were surrounded by professionals who were coaching you. You ended up hiring a coach when you were in your 20s. I think you're obviously a very coachable person. And I'm just curious, is obviously if you're in athletics, I'm guessing the more coachable you are, the more you're going to excel as an athlete. But I'm not an athlete, so I'm kind of curious, like there must also be a lot of athletes who are less coachable. And is that an obstacle?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think it just depends on what type of mindset you hold, obviously, as an athlete, that best determines how coachable or non-coachable you are, right? Like we see with a lot of the high achievers. Yeah, like I definitely see a lot of athletes who get really far resting on the laurels of their talent, but if they haven't taken time to architect the high performance growth mindset, then those people aren't necessarily even that coachable. Just because they're good doesn't mean that they're necessarily coachable, you know? Whereas it's interesting, what I really distilled in my high performance athletic career, wasn't always the best players that made it to the top, to be honest with you. It was the ones that had the work ethic, right? It were the ones that had that process-oriented mindset in and around their commitment to finding their edges. And those are the ones that were most coachable, obviously, right? Because they're the ones that had the ability to see that coaching for what it was, right? Which was a competitive advantage and ultimately the pathway and the portal to realizing max potential. But yeah, I definitely saw a lot of girls that I played with along the way that were super talented, but then obviously self-sabotaged a lot when they got into conditions where they had to be humble, maybe work their way up from the bench, as was my story at Princeton, yeah, those ones unfortunately couldn't sustain because they weren't as coachable.
I want to know, is there anything that you would go back and do differently
In regards to,
in regards to the path that you've taken?
you guys know me pretty well, so I kind of feel like you know the answer to that. I believe everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for us, not to us. And so whilst I sometimes reflect on how aggressive a gauntlet I had to go through upstream in my own high performance journey, there was a lot of pain and a lot of challenge, but I wouldn't change any of it because I realized that that was all a part of the plan.
Love that.
That was part of the process, right? Of my self-authorization. There's no way I could be this free at 43 as of last week, years old, right? If I hadn't have gone through the gauntlet. So no, I wouldn't have changed any of it because it brought me here. And I've never been more free or happier or more fulfilled on my mission. So no.
Right? No regrets. Yeah. Yeah. No regrets. All right,
Uh,
Leanne.
all
Okay,
right, time
well,
to turn these tables, ladies.
high achiever, perfectionist, like fixed mindset that we talk about that actually saw my stuckness as a personal flaw. Like there's something wrong with me, right? Because you look out at the other rock stars in the space who are killing it and have the shows and the books and the great websites and all the stuff. And it's sort of like, well, obviously people can do this, but I'm not. So therefore there's something wrong with me, or that is a sign that I don't belong, or maybe I don't have what it takes to succeed. This segues perfectly into my story because I think, Susan obviously showing up as impactfully as she does as a coach was really what got me through the door for coaching, because I heard Susan on a podcast. And she was talking about mindset. I really had no idea what that was at the time, but it was really all about this idea that if we know how to work with our mindset, then we can set it up to, help us go after our most important outcomes. And that really, I think, resonated with me so much at the time because I was really kind of stuck and stagnating in my career as a nutritionist. And I had a very kind of high achiever, perfectionist, like fixed mindset that we talk about that actually saw my stuckness as a personal flaw. Like there's something wrong with me, right? Because you look out at the other rock stars in the space who are killing it and have the shows and the books and the great websites and all the stuff. And it's sort of like, well, obviously people can do this, but I'm not. So therefore, there's something wrong with me, or that is a sign that I don't belong, or maybe I don't have what it takes to succeed. Right. And so hearing Susan on the podcast describe it to me this way, what really, like I said, resonated because I thought, okay, like maybe this is where there is actually some kind of a strategy, and me learning that is what is going to help me be able to, go out of the comfort zone. And that is, in fact, exactly, what happened was me understanding how to set myself up with beliefs that allowed me to go out of my comfort zone and take a risk. Right.
Mm.
And I think that was a huge thing. And that also came right at the same time as me really discovering that as I was working as a nutritionist and giving people all of these, protocols that I'd worked so hard on and giving them all this information, page after page after page, and they just couldn't do it. Or they do it for like a week or two and then come back. And they're always, and all of them were very successful, very capable, smart women in their 30s and 40s. And it's just like, what the heck? Like, okay, I'm stagnating here. I can't like seem to bust out in my business the way I want. And why are all of these women, they say this is what they want and how they want to feel and what they want to do for themselves, and yet they're not able to do it. So that's where I started connecting a lot of dots.
Mhm.
That behavior change, and in particular, the deeper behavior change around mindset and what that allows us to architect for ourselves, is really the answer to all of that. And I was obviously so fortunate to have Suzanne guiding me through this process. And I think I would say number two that came out of it. So I had this like professional sort of focus, but very, very quickly, Susan started getting into the personal thing with me, which was also, I think, just not understanding that I was like putting all my energy and all my focus into the wrong things. And I was so dissatisfied and very disconnected from myself. And so, I always say that for a lot of my clients, when they come through the door for coaching, they say, I just don't recognize myself anymore. I can completely, completely relate to that, because I think that was also the space I was in at the time. Right. And I didn't really understand, what I was doing wrong. And so for Susan helping me understand that, again, mindset running the show here was setting me up to value things like optics and like stuff around the house that doesn't matter and all of these things. And I didn't actually know that, for me, actually, one of my top values is growth. I need it. It really fuels me. And so I was blocked from being able to go and create an experience of growth in my life in all areas. I'm not just talking about personally, but professionally, with my marriage, with my kids, like with my health, with every lane. Like, how do I progress? Because that gives me so much fulfillment when I see that in my life. And so then, of course, getting that fulfillment made me happy. And when we're happy, well, that is one of those really renewable fuel sources that we talk about, right? And that's where my energy and my enthusiasm comes from. That's me. And so I'd lost that. I'd lost the connection with those things that would give me that and allow me to show up really in the way that I authentically am. So Susan is, I think, I have obviously a husband. I've been with him for 25 years. He's a big co-creator in my life, but I would say Susan is of the top co-creators in my life.
Oh my God.
I'm so grateful to you,
I'm
Susan.
so honored.
And
Honestly,
that's it. Like that's my whole story right there in a nutshell. And of course, like there's like a lot of nuances and nitty-gritties that we don't have time for me to get into, but that's it basically.
I just want to draw a through line between Leanne's share and mine, right? Like this is why I was so pissed off when I came out the gates of university, so disoriented. You're talking about feeling that when you hit 40 and walk through my door, but
Mhm.
like this is where I think society fails us. Why aren't we put through a process of self-discovery anywhere in our schooling years. Why is it that we still in 2025 have to go out there and hire coaches, right? For the purposes of self-discovery, because we know it catalyzes growth and high performance and impact and all of these fabulous, important things that we talk about on this show, right? But that's
the awareness and the benefits that are absent, right? Like just the actual understanding of what a coach can do and how game changing it is for your life. I don't think, sort of it's not necessarily the norm for people, right? It's like they're on a one-way street and think that what they're doing is exactly what they should be doing. And they, the rat, right? And until you're aware of what a coach actually brings to the table and the game-changing experience, I think that's part of the problem.
It's a huge part of the problem. And in fact, it almost blocked me because I run through my story. I heard on a podcast, I went through the door for coaching, but actually I heard Susan on a podcast. I didn't do anything about it till about 2 or 3 months later. And I went back and tried to kind of find who is she and who was she, because I wanted to do it. But part of me thought, well, it's going to cost money. Do I really need this? I'll figure it out. And you kind of keep going. And then fortunately or unfortunately for me, like the frustration just continued to mount behind the scenes for me. And eventually I was like, okay, I'm just going to phone her. And obviously it was meant to be. But I think that is a block as women, for sure. Just not wanting to spend the money on our development and to really see that as something that's important for us to do.
But it's the cost of not doing it.
Yeah.
I think that needs to be highlighted, right? It's the cost of not what you could potentially be, right? And clearing out those laneways and those gaps and really kind of uncovering yourself, right? And what is that potential, right?
Okay, Shelley.
This is why less than 1/3 of us adults reach the stage of maturation known as self-authorization, is because we have all of those prohibitive stories that we're not even privy to most of the time because they're so deeply unconscious, right? And in regards to why we shouldn't invest in ourselves, or why we should have it all figured out by now, right? Or why, we shouldn't be asking for help. Oh my gosh, the shame of having to hire a professional to help me sort out my track, right? Yeah, that's the thing that breaks my heart about it. It's like not only the fact that we don't get this anywhere webbed or woven within, the fabric of our society in terms of how we're leading our young people, right, towards their professional lives, or even setting them up from a personal perspective in terms of how to live a high quality of life experience. But yeah, I think it's the other thing that breaks my heart is just how much I see women specifically struggle with those stories, right? In terms of all the reasons why they shouldn't be investing in their damn selves.
You always have horrible bosses and you're like, okay, well, I'm never going to be like that. And you curate your own style in a roundabout sort of way. I was introduced to executive coaching. I'm like, executive coaching. Like I had no concept of it. Again, the awareness piece when it comes to corporate and leadership is really quite absent. We start talking about self-leadership. What is self-leadership? What does that even mean?
Shelley, where I want to go with you is this other stat that really peeves me off in this regard, which is the leadership development that we don't often see. On average, we're in a leadership role for 10 years, a decade, leading other human beings before we even get access to the privilege of developing ourselves as leaders, or the age of 42. So this is a perfect entry point into your first coaching and developmental experience with me, right? When I first came in to work with you as an executive coach.
Well, mine was north of 15 years. Right. And I had been, coaching teams my entire career, large organizations. And, I kind of was stealing, I think, what I thought leadership was based on examples that I'd had in my life. I do need to apologize to guests.
Oh, yeah. Shelley has a little bit of a head cold today, folks. So she is definitely being a trooper to be here today, but she's got a little bit of a cough going on.
Yes,
just to warn you.
I'm doing my best. But yes, I was stealing from what I thought leadership was to curate my own idea of how I was supposed to show up as a leader, right? Like, and, it was about, I guess, 5 years ago now that I was introduced to executive coaching. I'm like, executive coaching? Executive coaching. Like, I had no concept of it. Again, the awareness piece when it comes to corporate and leadership is really quite absent, right? And I remember getting on my first call with Susan, and I thought, okay, this is interesting. Is she like a therapist? Like, how does this all work? And, we start talking about self-leadership. What is self-leadership? What does that even mean? I'm not even aware, zero awareness that I had to lead myself first before I could actually lead teams. And so my experience with Susan was legitimately, to this day, one of the biggest aha moments of my life. Because as much as I was, on the rat race doing the things that I thought I was doing correctly, you start to peel back that layer of the onion and start to take a look really deep inside. And, Susan being Susan, challenge, 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 which is one of the roles of a coach, right? And especially a lot of my limiting beliefs that, I'm walking through the world completely blind thinking, I don't have any limiting beliefs, I'm good. And, and you start, well, seriously, like it's an awareness thing. It really was for me. And so as I started to do the really deep work with Susan and go really deep inside, and bring all of those, I don't want to call them skeletons or demons, but they kind of are, because you put everything in a pretty box and with a red bow and you put it over here and you don't want to deal with it, but you don't realize how much it actually shows up in the way that you lead. You can put on the mask as much as you want, but at some point, if you're not dealing with the stuff that you need to deal with to be a better person and a better leader for your teams, the mask will fall off, right? I was very, very much prepared to do the deep work. And I started to show up differently, right? Because I was showing up differently for myself. And that, by osmosis, started to trickle into my team and how the team was showing up as well, right? It was just game changing. It really was, for not only myself and not only the team, but the organization.
Do you remember what your biggest gap was?
100% imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
100%.
Whoa, I wouldn't have seen that from you, Shelley. Whoa.
I know, not now. You wouldn't have seen, you don't see now, but
No.
when I first met Susan, oh my goodness. Number one, I had no idea what imposter syndrome was. And yeah, that was definitely it for me. It really was. I was walking through the world with a mask on, right? Hoping that, it wasn't all of a sudden going to fall off and people are like, oh, that's what it is. Oh, that's what it is. And start to pick that apart, right? So it becomes a bit robotic, right? And when you start to just let the defenses down and really do the deep work and take a look inside, I'm no longer afraid of any of that gets brought to the forefront. I'm just not, right? If anything needs to be brought to the forefront, I want to tackle it and tackle it now, right? And get ahead of it versus the box with the bow that sits back here. So
Proactive versus reactive, right, ladies?
100%. So again, for me, self-leadership was net new, and really didn't understand the dramatic, and I'm talking dramatic effect it had as me as a human being, as a mother, as a wife, as a leader. It trickled into every single aspect of my life. It really, really did. And not just corporate and not just leading the teams, but my relationships in general, night and day. So
That's
I have to thank Susan.
That's so interesting. And so when you're talking about your relationships, obviously I know you have your family and friends and just outside of work as well. Was it the imposter syndrome that was impacting that as well, or is it something a little different?
It was definitely the imposter syndrome.
Okay.
It was prevalent in every aspect of my life. I don't think, it's not that I wasn't aware of it. I wasn't ready to deal with it and I wasn't ready to face it. And it forced me to do so. And it just, and as a result, showed up as a better person, right? Drop the titles, right? Let's drop the leader. Let's drop being a mom. Let's drop everything that we define as titles to define who we are. I was a better Shelley. I was a better me.
Mm-hmm.
That's the TSN turning point, right? Is like if we're still in our mask wearing stage of leadership, we know all of that is how the imposter syndrome manifests, right? Is that, yeah, like first and foremost, it's exhausting to have to try to show up every single day, launched from a cannon in terms of the intensity your nervous system feels in regards to the lack of safety you feel when you need to go out into the world every single day, improve yourself, especially as a female leader who is now penetrating some pretty important positions of power and influence, right? Like, yeah, let's talk about that in terms of just how that ticking time bomb, right, for both of you and both of your stories is like a big part of what catalyzes this opportunity. But then when you step into this space of learning how to belong to yourself, it's what you're talking about, right? In terms of who am I and coming home to Shelley, all of that in terms of being at the helm in your self-leadership as the authority, you no longer have to show up in the world proving yourself all the time. And it frees up so much capacity and bandwidth, right?
I was able, and you know, one of the blessings, and because I call it a blessing, to finally be my authentic self. And I know that sounds like a bit of a buzzword, but it's true, right? When you do the deep work and you peel it all back, you just show up differently for yourself, never mind everybody else. But Susan, one of the things that I'd love to know, because you've coached both myself as well as Leanne, what differences have you seen since when you met me to who I am today, and same with Leanne?
Ooh, that's a big one.
I
Do we have
know.
do we have all
We
day
have
when it
time
comes
for
to when it
that
comes to me?
one.
I think for both of you, it's actually quite similar. Like I've seen you rise into your power. I've watched you ascend, right? As you've come into your alignment, as you come home to yourselves and found that level of self-acceptance, radical self-acceptance, that really is the portal to empowerment, right? I think I've seen it in terms of the manifestation of these powerful voices that you have, right? And I think that it comes through in a way that is so much more impactful and influential for me on the other side of receiving that energy, because it comes from such a place of grounded authenticity. I think that to me is like for sure the thing that I think of first when I think of both of you is just like the difference in terms of the power of your voice and impact and influence that comes from stepping to the helm in your self-leadership.
Mm.
What do you two think has been the biggest difference?
Well, go ahead, Leanne.
Oh, I was going to say, for me, it always comes back to just feeling, we talk about being in the helm of our experience and self-leadership and everything. And for me, my work along the way and where I always come back to is the choices, and understanding what a choice point is and the awareness around that. And then, of course, the intelligence to be able to do something about it. So for our listeners, what I'm talking about is, we're making choices all day long, and me really understanding like that's the big difference maker for me is on a day-to-day basis. I can look at the choices that I'm making and I can deeply get into what's motivating those choices. And I can see some of this old programming sometimes want to pop up, right, around not asking for help or what's important and what's not important and all this sort of stuff. And I'm able to show up in greater self-leadership because I can lead myself away from those self-sabotaging choices. Of course, I'm not perfect, but for the most part, I'm leading myself in the right direction, and the way I feel tells me that that's true. As opposed to, yeah, just kind of like being reactive, right? I was so stuck being reactive to my roles and responsibilities. And so being able to free myself from that, yeah, that is, I think, like the biggest transformation for me. Is that led to everything else? Yeah.
And that shows up in your power.
Mm,
And
mhm.
right? In your voice, in your authority, in the self-trust and the security that registers on the other side of this equation when we hear your voice, our voices, and yeah, like the inspiration that comes from that is because it comes from such a deeply authentic place in both of you, you know? That is a felt experience for those of us on the other side and receiving those voices. How about you, Shell? What do you think you notice or calibrate in your experience has been the biggest change?
So many, but and the one that I really want to talk about today, because I think it does trickle into a million other things, is I was definitely a high achiever before. And constantly on the need for external validation. Just feedback. Like it was just it was strange until I actually made the pivot where I stopped to drop the weight of other people's opinions, and started to feel and fuel the confidence inside myself, right? And it was intrinsic validation, that learning how to take up space in the world. And my opinion is okay. Do you know what I mean? It was always like, constantly second guessing myself as a high achiever, right? And the pivot into a high performer, it just drops the weight, right? And I finally at, and I'm very proud to say 50, as,
Woohoo,
as of
50 club.
as of last week, taking up space in the world as my authentic self. So that for me was the biggest pivot. I was the classic definition, as I thought I had built my own leadership style. What I had actually built was a high achiever mentality and mindset. And the pivot into a high performer was absolutely game changer.
Now that's arriving in your authority, right? When you drop the burdens of other people's opinions, I think it's Mel Robbins who's on a tear right now talking about let them.
Yeah, I love it.
It's so powerful. It's like two words, but we all anchor into the energy of what those two words represent. It's exactly what you just riffed on right there, which is dropping the armor. Right? And all those conditioned, limited beliefs about who we need to be in order to show up in this world and be accepted by this world. What a tragedy to get through this whole life, right? And never drop that armor and discover who you really are. And therefore who you truly were meant to be in this lifetime. What a tragedy, I say. So yeah, I think there's a lot of power in this whole let them strategy that we're riffing on right here.
I absolutely 100% agree. And not that it's second, but, I don't think I would have focused on legacy and impact. And again, not just as C-suite leader, legacy and impact, home, relationships, all of it, right? Like I needed to make the pivot into a high performer before I could actually see that and realize that the thumbprint for me, regardless of who that interaction was with, someone's experience with me was very different than I thought my experience was with them, right? And really being conscious of that and sitting always now from a place of curiosity versus judgment, like just the tips and tricks and tools and everything now that I have on a tool belt, to be able to pull out when I need it was what I used to do, but now it's just part of who I am. Right. And that legacy for me at the end of the day, the thumbprint, whoever I interact with, I want that to be a positive experience. Right. And even people I'd worked with in the past, people used to get upset when people used to leave a business, let's say, not anymore. Right. Like whatever your experience was with the corporation, what matters to me was your experience with me as a leader. Right. And that impact that I've left behind. So high performer and legacy are my two like, thank you.
Those are big. I would say too, like, as I'm listening to you talk and I'm kind of connecting some dots in terms of, legacy and I feel like one of the things that I sometimes see in some of my younger female clients is the sense of disappointment with themselves because they feel like they have so much to give and they're not giving it. So it's like them trying to get into an alignment with their potential. And I really resonate with that because obviously if you can't go out of the comfort zone, like I couldn't, you're not exploring your potential. And so I feel like, connecting with that and understanding that growth leads to you exploring your potential. And then when you're doing that, you can really never be disappointed with yourself because you're living the way that you want to live. And I think a lot of high achievers, their potential is very, very important to them, but they just don't know how to get into into alignment with that. So that was another big takeaway for me and that's part of legacy. That's just part of understanding what I want, for myself. What's a good life, or a life well lived for me, and obviously the people around me that I'm going to impact.
And at the end of the day, at the end of my life, and I say this all the time, I hope I've contributed more than I've criticized. It's something that sits with me and something I think about constantly, right? Is the contribution to everything that I put out there and my relationships with people, right? Versus the criticism and judgment, right? It's game changer. It's just changed everything about me.
Yeah, I feel like as a 2.0 leader, to me, it's all about purpose. And that's what I attribute coaching to, is like I am so on my knees in gratitude every morning in my gratitude work that I do in my mental gym. Just so deeply thankful that my soul got to awaken during this lifetime thanks to coaching. I never, ever, ever would have been able to tap into and unlock this level of alignment, which when we're talking about alignment, for those listening, we're talking about, making sure that you're on a track to making decisions in regards to your time, your energy, your focus, your willpower, those limited finite resources that we're only given so much of in our bandwidth as human beings to invest. But in terms of the hardwiring that predicts the decisions that we're going to make about our bandwidth towards the things that matter to us at a soul level, right? In terms of from an authentic self level, right? In terms of the truth of what I believe was hardwired and programmed into our DNA on purpose for a reason. Because we came here to awaken to that, to tap into that, and then ultimately to unleash that in this lifetime. There's no greater gift than that. And I just don't see a pathway to that track of alignment that doesn't include coaching.
Oh, I couldn't imagine it ever. You know what I mean? Like we all go through different phases in our lives, and I could not ever imagine now not having it part of my journey. It just is, and it just has to be, right?
I
Just
love
that.
it. I love it.
Mm.
Well, I think that's where we want to land the plane today on this quick rip in terms of bringing you all behind the gates of our hero's journey, just a little bit, just a taste test. We've got a lot of different ideas in terms of some of the things that we can explore in our vulnerability and transparency on this mic. But yeah, of course, we're in the year of co-creation on this show. So as a primer and reminder, please drop us a line and let us know what are some areas that you would like to tap into and learn about or discover. Where would you like us to go and flow in terms of illuminating some of what lies behind our gates as coaches, as 2.0 leaders in this world? Just as a reminder, you can send me an email, susan@elitehighperformance.com. I'm also going to suggest that you drop Leanne and Shelly a line at their emails. So Leanne at elitehighperformance.com, Shelly at elitehighperformance.com. And the line I want you to drop us, because I'm feeling inspired, and I hope you ladies are feeling this inspiration too. But I would love for us to offer some sample coaching sessions to some of the people in our crowd who are feeling the inspiration coming through their airwaves right now. Maybe you've never had coaching before. Maybe you got close and then talked yourself out of it because of some of the prohibitive backstories that we were talking about and riffing on today. Or maybe you resonated with some of the language that we're using when we describe that moment of choice that changed the game for each and every one of us here today. That day we decided to walk on through the coaching door for the first time. I'm going to ask, I think the first 2 people that reach out to me, I'll give a sample free coaching sessions to. How about you ladies? What would you like to do?
I will do the exact same thing. And by the way, it's Shelley, just so you spell it correctly.
We'll make sure we
Yeah.
got all that in the show notes.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm happy to do the same offer, and my name is LIANE at elitehighperformance.com.
I love the generosity in this locker room today. Nothing makes me happier. You know, that's definitely one of my values. So yeah, email us the word co-create, okay? And the first 2 people that reach out will be given a free coaching session and experience. I can't wait to come back on these airwaves and talk about some of that. I can't wait to continue digging into some of our backstories for our folks. You are the inspiration behind this all for us. Remember, your highest potential is literally our passion. You can see that's why this is our life's work. We are very fervent about our belief in terms of the capacity that this portal holds, this vehicle known as coaching. So we're very excited to hear from all of you, our audience. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you back here again next week.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.